Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
And today, I am so excited. This is an episode that I've been looking forward to for a really, really long time. We have a super special guest, but I'm going to wait a minute to intro her because we always have to start with our favorite segment, Elena, Coaching and Training Insights.
Can't do it without starting with coaching and training insights.
Absolutely. All right, so let's knock these out before we jump into our guest. Two insights for me that came up in the last couple weeks. The first one is actually all about the idea of not using too much data in the way that we approach training. So I have been doing a lot of tempo running recently. That's kind of been a staple of my run training this spring and summer. I guess we're just about into summer right now. And I was instructed to do a speed workout the other day without looking at my watch, which is interesting because I am someone who can be guilty of spending too much time absolutely staring at my watch and looking at all those intervals. And actually, a side on that is a friend was driving through the city of Boston a couple weeks ago and texted me that she saw me running, and the way that she identified that it was me was because of the way that I looked at my watch as I was running. So that was a good calling me out for something that I do. But anyway, my run coach had suggested, okay, I want you to do a run that has 2 miles hard in the middle, just without looking at your watch at all. And I was a little bit nervous about it, but I said I'd give it a try. And so I went out and I did it. And it was hard. And, I got through it. And then I finished the run and I looked down at the data after and realized that I had gone so much faster than I would have gone if I had been looking at my pace the whole time. Because if I'd looked at my pace the whole time, I think I would have said, this is not sustainable. This is too hot for 2 miles. This is above my 5K race pace. There's no way that I could sustain that. And yet I negative split the 2 miles in the middle and absolutely blew myself away with times that I did not think I was capable of. So I think the lesson here is sometimes the data can be useful and sometimes data can get in our heads. So if there's a way to sometimes even do a data-free session or just flip your watch over, force yourself to ignore it, I now have a lot more confidence in my abilities. And I have a race coming up that I think I probably will have completed by the time this episode airs. And I might not be looking at my watch at all during that race and just trying out what it's like to go by feel. So that was a pretty cool insight.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for that one, you had the data though. So you had to actually convince yourself to not look at your watch while you were running, which is actually harder than not having it at all.
I flipped it over actually, so it was not so tempting. I would have had to contort my arm a little bit, and I was going pretty hard. So yeah, there is some level of restraint that has to happen. And I did hear the beep when I knew that 1 mile was up, so I knew I was halfway done. But yeah, I did successfully avoid
okay, I want to try that. I'm gonna have to flip it over then, because I feel like every time I tell myself I'm not gonna look at my watch, I'm either thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going so fast, I want to see how fast I'm going, or I'm going I'm going too slow and I need to check it. So cool, very great. Yeah. Well, my insight then is more on the travel side. I've been traveling a lot recently, and there's a couple things that has come up. One is that I realized that throughout travel, it's a lot harder to stay on your routine of how you're taking care of yourself. And one of the things that I do a lot is take my iron supplements because I have a history of low iron. And I've noticed that my iron levels have gone down a little bit. I just got a blood test recently about that. And that's mainly because I haven't been on my routine. So I've been thinking more specifically about how to make sure I can make it easy for myself to remember these things while I'm traveling. And one of those things for me was getting a little pill box to just put an iron pill in and a vitamin in, and it's just 2 pills. But at least every day I'm taking out my pill box and knowing what I have to do, which is just making it a little bit easier. But just a reminder that travel is tricky for staying on any type of routine, and thinking about that in advance. The other aspect of it is hydration. With a lot of plane rides too, and the heat of the summer, hydration has become something that I have to really focus on, where I'm forcing, actually one trick I have is that I'm filling my water bottle before I go to the airport, and then I'm forced to drink the whole thing to go through security, which sometimes is the problem if you're sitting in the aisle and have to pee. But other than that, it is helpful for having to make sure that I'm drinking something while I'm traveling on a plane, because I think it just does something about dehydrating me massively that's hard for me to bounce back from if I'm not actively drinking throughout. So especially with summer, if you're doing any traveling, or if in general it's just hotter out, have a water bottle, maybe fill it with some electrolytes and be sipping it throughout the day, because I think the hydration or lack of hydration is really starting to add up.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're a huge fan of add electrolytes to your water, even for everyday hydration. Things like drinking Element, for example, throughout the day when it's this hot, I think is really, really important. And I'm glad you're home now. I feel you on all the travel. I'm coming off a lot of travel myself. And actually, this feeds into another insight that I was thinking about, which is that it's also really hard to stay on top of super good fueling when you're traveling all the time. I have been to, I believe, 5 different graduation events in the last 10 days. And I was at one graduation ceremony that went from like 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I had gone for a hard run before that and had one bar with me. And I was so hungry by the end of that thing. And I was like, how do people survive this type of stuff? Because I'm used to that consistent access. So make sure that you're planning ahead for any type of travel, because time zones and flights and all of that can really, really mess with your standard recovery fueling routine.
Yeah, totally. My food bill when I'm traveling goes up so much because I just have to eat out everywhere, and then I'm just getting every meal because I have to have the food, and it's a lot.
Awesome. Well, hopefully everyone, I know you have travel coming up. I'm home for a little bit, but in general, everyone take care of yourselves in the context of travel so you can recover and hit those workouts. But with that, I think we are ready to transition into our really, really exciting episode for the day. And this one is all about us just really wanting to get some wisdom from the one and only Laura Fay. So Laura, we have you on the episode today. And to just give you a little background, Laura has been in our community for a long time now. She's been working with Jim as her coach for the last 3 years, but really has just integrated herself in the entire Endurance Drive community. Everyone knows her, everyone loves her. And she also has such a cool story as it pertains to her journey through sport and her career, which she works in executive coaching. And that's really interesting because us as sport coaches think that we have a lot of lessons to learn, the parallels between coaching and also how we can all just get the best out of our performance, whether it's sport or career. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other things, but maybe without further ado, I'll just say, Laura, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being here.
I'm so honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we usually start this out with the same question for our guests, which is actually just to tell us your story. So you can take that any direction that you're interested in, but we are interested kind of in how you got through sport as well as career as it pertains to some of the topics that we'll sprinkle in later today.
Awesome. All right. So I'll see if I can make this sound intelligent. So I, as a kid, moved around a lot, I think 4 different places before middle school, not a military family, an insurance family, go figure. But I think my parents were super conscious about helping us adapt and trying to get us involved in a lot of things as a means of kind of settling that. So I did all the things like swim team and sports and dance. And I think that's where I really started to figure out like this idea of community and sport. I just loved being around other people who had, some similar interests. I'm also one of 3 girls in my family, so total girl dad, right? And he really had this competitive, he did sports all through college. And so I remember this vivid moment, I think it was 7th grade, where he took me to middle school. He's like, I don't care what it is, but you got to sign up for something. You're going to be active. You're going to do something. And he said, I'll be back to pick you up afterwards. And so, I knew nothing about it, but I was like, field hockey sounds fun. Let's give that a shot. So I ended up playing field hockey and lacrosse all the way through college. And again, it just kind of reinforced this idea of community, and my greatest joy and moments through that time was really related to sport. The other thing that happened in college that I think was kind of transformational, I remember having a conversation with my field hockey coach, and she's like, you're right on the cusp of, the JV varsity. I think maybe it was a freshman or sophomore. She said, you're just on the bubble. And that has stuck with me. And, my college roommate and I always joke about, you're just a bubble. You're on the bubble, because it was kind of the difference. And I knew I was never going to be the elite performance person. But I think that's when I figured out that what I could control was what I put into it. And so the consistency, the discipline, the work ethic, I think that really was the time where I was determined not to be on the bubble all the time and put in the work. And that really got me through a lot. And so I kind of kept up with field hockey and lacrosse all through college. And when I got out, and I think you've talked about this in the past, this idea of when you leave like a team sport or a community like that, you're like, what am I supposed to do now? I was so used to the structure of, being part of college athletics that I kept up running, and I decided to give myself a goal. So I started doing some half marathons a couple times a year. And then at the time I was dating my now husband, and we decided we're going to run the Disney Marathon. And we joke about it because it literally was the first and last race he ever did. So, he was still trying to impress me. We were dating, and he's like, okay, ran the race, got the girl, I'm never running again. So literally he's been a great fan, but not an actual participant. So I would say that was a pretty memorable race. I would say from there, I really wanted to try another marathon, and you can't live in Boston and not think about running the Boston Marathon. And I think this was one of the most impactful kind of sports experiences in my life. Was at the time, obviously, I wasn't going to qualify. So I ran with a charity, the Boston Children's Hospital, and they were doing patient matches at the time. And I was matched with a little girl who was working through leukemia, and she was just awesome and amazing and gave me this inspiration. I got to see her at like the halfway point. And so I have found that I either need to find things that really fulfill my purpose, and the joy, or that allow me to challenge myself, which is why when my high school best friend, I think it was 2017, said, hey, there's this like women's only sprint triathlon. I was like, I know nothing about triathlon. I don't even think I got a bike. I haven't swum since I was on the swim team when I was 8, but just decided to do it, kind of went all in, and I was hooked. So after that, decided I got to find a tri club in the area, interviewed a couple coaches, and just had the absolute fortune of finding Coach Jim, who is just, the best. And so here I am.
I love the thread that you can trace athletically through every stage is something that I always find interesting in people, but also like not too uncommon that there's this story of like, I had a team and then I didn't know what to do afterwards, and now I had to find something else. I think the first thing that stood out to me that I'm curious about is that you do focus so much on community, which we talk a lot about, and it's so awesome. Throughout high school and college, it sounds like you had like an actual team, and then I'm just more curious about how you actually made that transition into finding that community in a place that, endurance, it does make sense because we understand how community forms, but it's not as straightforward as having a team. So what were some of the strategies that you used to find that community?
Yeah, and it really was when I got into triathlon and I searched because I figured there is a lot I need to learn about the sport. I don't know the first thing, particularly around open water swimming. And so there is a local tri club called Tri Fury. And so I joined that mostly because I needed some like group support. But I don't even know where I should go to swim. And I definitely don't feel comfortable doing a long bike ride by myself. So I met up with someone who lived in my town who was part of this club. And he's like, I'll show you the ropes. And I ended up meeting a couple of people through that tri club and was kind of then heading into COVID. And I feel so blessed that I found this group of people. And there are 3 folks in particular, John, Paul, and Dan. And during COVID, we met every weekend to go running. It was like the only thing we could do, right? Be outside. And then I just started every weekend kind of centered around being with these folks. And they were all like supreme athletes in their own right, doing a ton of Ironmans. And so a lot of it was me just like hanging on for dear life and trying to keep up with them. But I have just found that it can, and it'll relate to some of the other topics we probably talk about, but it gave me kind of the confidence. It also gave me the support. It gave me a lot of education. So I think if you don't know where to go, like just look up a local tri club, find one person, and that sometimes can be enough to just get you comfortable enough to meet other people who have some similar interests.
That's awesome, Laura. And yeah, you're one of the people who is so good about both building community and being a part of community. So that's something we're going to return to for sure. I wanted to also dig into, you had this high school and collegiate career playing more team sports, playing field hockey, playing lacrosse. And I think something that we see is that not specializing in endurance sports too early can actually be really advantageous for getting to do that down the line. Could you talk a little bit sort of about that transition? And, there are some people who are running cross country starting in 5th grade, and that's their sport forever and ever. And there are also some people who go that team sport route. So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I think triathlon for me was as much about I need to do some cross training because the older I get, my body cannot hack like just running all the time. And so it was as much about I need to find something to transition that I'm going to be able to do for a long time. And so I think that the idea of endurance sports never really occurred to me. And I wouldn't have even considered any of the running I was doing to be endurance sports. And so when I started out, I was really just doing sprint triathlons and did the one Olympic. And so I still look at myself and I'm like, I don't really consider myself an endurance athlete. And I know it's all the stories we tell ourselves in our head, but I think it was honestly the point at which I started working with Jim and I started thinking about there's this whole physiological thing that I can do differently around zone training. And it just made me feel like, okay, if I prepare myself and take care of myself the right way, I actually can consider challenges and endurance, aspirations that I really had never considered in the past. So I think it was kind of an organic, natural shift, like getting confident and doing some of the short stuff and then just finding I like this, especially how much easier it is on my body than just being a runner.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm similar to you where I got into it later after doing a bunch of team sports. And there's something about that. And it seems like you have that understanding too, that you can put in the work and then you'll get the results over time. It's like this long commitment to yourself. And that definitely resonates. And I guess I'm curious to transition that a little bit toward your career as well, because now we understand your athletic journey, but you've also had this really long form career that's taken a lot of different twists and turns to bring you to where you are now. And maybe if you could just talk us through that, and I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions on how you got to where you are now.
Sure. Well, I graduated from college and did what most college graduates do. And it's like, who is going to hire me? Because I'll take that job. And so I went into financial services, which is silly because I was a political science major. So there you go, Katie. I, studied something. Hopefully you use your degree more than I used mine. And the job that I could get in financial services was an executive assistant job. So I started as an admin, and I have to say that I'm so glad I did. I have such an appreciation for the people who kind of keep stuff running in businesses and, otherwise. So I was this assistant. I found I was pretty organized. So I was actually offered a role doing project management, teaching people project management. Ended up working on a project where I interacted a lot with the person who was head of corporate communications at the time. And he kind of looked at me and said, you're kind of good at that comms stuff too. Do you want a job doing comms? And that the rest is kind of history from there. So I have always loved reading. I have always loved writing. I am like a crazy neurotic editor. My children hate it when I read their stuff because I'm a nightmare. But I ended up deciding that was a path I really enjoyed. I went back and got my master's in communication. And so the roles I was having at the time were really around things like public relations and kind of internal communications, executive communications. There were some huge crises that were happening in the industry. Like we were going through the tech bubble. We were going through a lot of regulatory stuff. And so I ended up leaving one company and joining another company. And as is normal in banking and financial services, there was a lot of M&A. Everyone was getting acquired. So I don't know, I've been with one company, it felt like, but we, were changed hands like 3 or 4 times. So I was leading this really small team of folks, a communications team, and we got acquired by Wells Fargo. And at the time I had to interview for a new job. And I honestly, this was another life lesson was, I had 3 or 4 folks who were reporting to me. The job I was interviewing for was maybe like 30 people were going to report to me in all these different functions. And I was like, I am not qualified. I don't think I can do this. This is really scary. This is a lot bigger than I've prepared myself for. But I went in because I had no choice and I ended up getting the job. And it is just this idea of, man, sometimes the forced risks we take are the best things that ever happened to us. And I ended up staying in that job and building that team and doing a couple different things there for, I want to say it's like 17 years. And I loved it until they went through some challenges and they were needing to cut some efficiencies. And I had a conversation with my boss at the time. She's like, I'm sorry, but we're eliminating your role. And for anyone who has been laid off, it is the worst in terms of a total identity crisis. Like, what am I supposed to do? What value? I must be no good if they don't want to hang on to me. And it's really, so I feel for anyone who's gone through that because it can really mess with your ego and your psyche. But it was so cliche, one of those classic best thing that ever happened to me. Like if I had not, and towards the end of being in this job, I still like the work. But I felt like, there was 280,000 people at the company and I felt like a cog in the wheel and just not finding the joy, even though I'd convinced myself I was. So it gave me this opportunity. I had been there so long, they gave me a really long severance package and I was able to think about what would I want to do if I could choose? And so I had a couple different options. I took some time. I did a lot of cooking. I did a lot of walking with my dog and found a small firm that a colleague had recommended to me that really was all about coaching and helping leaders and teams develop so that they could be really effective in driving business strategy. And I never knew that it really existed until I talked to this person. I was like, okay, that sounds amazing and cool. And I found that I was more prepared for it than I thought I was, because a lot of what I had done in the large company was counsel executives on communications and messaging. How do you connect with people? How do you get better? So it actually made perfect sense for me to go sit on the other side of the table because I lived kind of the corporate world that these executives were coming in. I knew their challenges. I knew the stuff that they were struggling with because I had been there. So it was, perfect for me to kind of come in and get, certified and began working with leaders and teams. And I would say the one other thing that happened during that whole transition, a couple of years before that, I was leading a team and an individual that reported to me, who was just a wonderful person, ended up going into cardiac arrest in the office. And it was this whole surreal experience, right? Tried to give CPR and tried to bring him back, and it didn't work. And he passed away. And this, I will say, of all the times in my life, was this point at which I changed everything about my view on the world, my philosophy. It was, you have to stay true to your emotions. You have to lead with empathy. And I think that whole experience and living through that loss has made me a better coach, because I find that there is a place for emotion and there is a place for empathy in business and in leadership. So I guess those experiences, kind of being laid off, losing this amazing colleague, finding this new job and realizing I can actually do this, I can rise from the ashes kind of thing, has really put me in a place where I'm so grateful that I get to do what I do every day.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that, Laura. I think that your story is really, really meaningful, because a lot of our listeners are a little bit younger and are just figuring out what this path is going to look like. And our paths are actually quite different from yours, but I see so many of these parallels between what sport coaching looks like, as well as coaching leaders and coaching executives. I wonder if we can maybe talk a little bit about those parallels. I think you have pretty good exposure to what coaching looks like for us from being coached and listening to our podcast, and we talk about it all the time together. But I think we'd love to learn, what have you picked up that you think these parallels are both in sport and in life, and what makes a good coach in both of those contexts?
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, I think about just kind of this basic premise of, if there's something that you're not feeling like you're an expert in, that you are having challenges with, or you can't see clearly, why wouldn't you hire a coach, right? Why not have someone come in who can help support you, who can see things differently, whether it's sport or life or business. There's such a use for that. So I guess, executive coaching, I don't feel is that different from kind of performance in sport, because it's not about this perception of, well, something must be broken in order for you to need that support and to make that investment in yourself. And it's really not. It's often about, hey, there's some things you're really good at, and we just want to use that to make you even better. So how do we do that? I do think a coach can be a neutral, objective person who can give the tough love, who can help see blind spots. So I think that is something that, especially, I don't know about you guys, but I don't always see when I am doing things to derail myself, even if it's positive intention. So sometimes I need someone to call me out. And if, my husband does it or my kids do it, I'm going to react very differently than if an objective coach who has, no skin in the game in terms of being anything other than honest. I think it's really important to have that viewpoint. They can also really see the positive in you when you choose not to see the positive in yourself. And that's hard sometimes. Like there are times where, I've talked to Coach Jim, and he will just boost me up when I am really down on myself. And so I know I have tried to work a lot on kind of my mental game and the narrative, the negative self-talk. And so it's hard to do that yourself unless you have someone helping to reinforce that. So I would say someone who can see what's great about you, someone who can see your blind spots. In executive coaching, we also talk a lot about overstrengths. And this idea of when you're really good at something, like too much of a good thing can sometimes be too much of a good thing. And as athletes, we already have some of those tendencies, right? To push ourselves hard, to do more than sometimes we should. So that overstrength, sometimes you need someone to rein it in and say, yeah, you're going a little hard on that. Here's where I think you should pull back. And for me, I know there's a lot of different styles that people kind of gravitate towards. I like having mental models or techniques and tools, like people giving ideas. And so you guys have talked a lot about have a mantra and think, I'm just going to get through the next 5 minutes. And that is similar to what I do with executive coaching. It's let's talk about what specific things can you do just to make some baby steps towards progress. So it's different models, but the same idea of how do you create structure and rigor and discipline so someone can take the good and really kind of draw that out. I mean, I think perhaps the biggest benefit is have an accountability partner. I know some of my coaching clients are like, if I didn't have this coaching meeting on the calendar, I don't know that I would follow through on everything that I need to. But when I see that meeting coming up for next week, I'm like, oh shoot, I got to get my stuff together because Laura's going to ask me these questions. So, I mean, whether it's training peaks or just having a conversation with your coach, I think there is, someone's waiting to hear from you and waiting to get your updates. It really can change kind of how much you invest in that. So that probably went on too long, but those are some of the parallels I see.
No, it's so awesome. And it is really true. Like, I think how you described it so well and eloquently that each of these things really stand out to me as well. And I guess to take it one step further, I mean, we know you're awesome and we also know you're very humble, but I would love to hear more from you specifically about you succeeded in this role that was very scary to you, and you've now become a successful executive coach and you've been managing your athletics all throughout the way. What do you think are the things that you do that allow you to succeed? Like any of the tactical things or just traits that you have that are helpful for how you approach all these challenges?
Yeah, I think I have had to be really intentional about time management is kind of a big one because life is so busy, and it's been particularly busy the past couple of years. There's just a lot going on. So I guess I'm a little bit type A, but I have leaned into that in terms of I need to create structure in my day, and that includes downtime. And I always will tell my executive coaching clients, Friday afternoons, block out 2 hours in your calendar and use it to do an audit of what's coming up for the following week and flag things like, I know that's going to be a tough conversation or a tough meeting. I need to prepare for that differently. So I think something like that, where you're really intentional about blocking out white space in your calendar so that you aren't walking into your next conversation or meeting wondering, oh my gosh, what do I have to do? Or there's going to be a tough conversation and I'm not prepared. So that is one tactical thing that I find that I do, and I also recommend, is just block out the time in your calendar for downtime so that you can prepare. I would say the other thing that I do is, and this is actually a tool or a technique that we use a lot in executive coaching, is we call it the audience agenda, which is so often the interactions we have are really about trying to convince someone of something or influence someone of something, where really we need to step into the other person's shoes and anticipate kind of what matters to them. So I find it's, as a communications person, thinking about what are the things that are going to matter to this person I'm interacting with, how is this going to show up differently for them, is as important as us going in with our own narrative. And so anyway, that's to say, carving out some space, making sure that you're thinking about what's coming and how it's going to be received. This would be two of the things that I try to do religiously.
And can I ask also, so thinking about how you integrate sport with career, I know from Strava that you are usually out there 5:30, 5 in the morning, getting your workouts in. And a lot of our listeners have had questions about, like, how do people manage really busy schedules, full-time job with also training? You're training for a half Ironman coming up in September. How does that look like for you in terms of balancing sport with life? And then maybe we'll have a bigger conversation too, just about balance in general, because you're also a mom and you're also doing a million other things that take up a lot of time.
Yeah. And I don't remember the point at which I became a morning person, but I guess I sort of did. And I think it is a little bit out of necessity. And also I know my own limitations. If I were to save my workouts into the afternoon, so many things would derail me and it just would never get done, whether it's my energy level or just things that pop up with my kids. So I think I found, morning is the time when it can just be my time. And so it's worked for my schedule and for my family and everything, but it's also worked for me because I find there is nothing better for me to start a day just getting my whole mental outlook in check by doing that first thing in the morning. I will say I used to be the 4 a.m. crew, like up before, and I actually love running in cold, dark, extreme weather and just weird like that. But I am finding it's not as easy to get up at 4 a.m. as it used to be. So sometimes it pushes to 4:30 or 5. But it is what works for me because it is a time when no one is looking for me. It is a time when no one is asking for anything from me. And that allows me to really focus on just myself, which is not something I'm very good at and I'm trained to do better. So I think it's not for everyone, but for me, it's working right now.
Just a very quick question on that. What time do you go to bed? If you're getting up at 4 or 4:30.
Yeah, I know. My husband and one of my kids are total night owls, and they're like, "Oh, it's 8 o'clock. You're going to bed, aren't you? I guess we'll see you tomorrow." Yeah, I try to be asleep by 9 o'clock at the latest, which is absurd, and it makes me sound like an old lady. But yeah, I don't know. 8 o'clock, I start winding down, and
no, it's good. You gotta embrace it.
Awesome. I don't think it's old. I'm 27, and I love to be asleep by 9 when I can. So
yeah. That's my aspiration for sure.
Please.
Cool. Well, okay, I think one other thing that I would love to hear your take on is you joke about it making you an old lady, but you're not old at all, but you progressed this journey in athletics from, what you said, 7th grade all the way until what you're doing now. And you've had this career and you're a parent. Like, I'm just so curious to hear your thoughts on what this journey has looked like for you and how your relationship with sport has evolved as you've aged. Because you have also shared with us in previous episodes in our crowdsourcing about how difficult aging has felt at different times. So we'd just love to hear you break that down a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. And I think part of what's hard is everyone is so different and you don't know exactly how the aging process is going to affect you. And you also don't know if it's aging or if it's other things. So I would say I actually felt like even from college sports, I was probably at my peak fitness and performance, a couple years after that, just really found that I was able, partly because the structure got taken away and I was doing things because I wanted to, and I was choosing kind of what I wanted to do. So there was a benefit to having the structure and a benefit to not having the structure. But I guess what evolved is I did find that I liked racing. I liked the competition in a slightly different way, not because I have never found that I care about racing against others. It's never been about needing to be top of my age group or anything like that. It's always been about, can I improve from my last time? So I think my goals shifted from, I need to do some weight management and exercise and be really good at college sport, to I need to do this for my sanity, but I want to do it for fun and figure out, to I need some new challenges, things that are going to encourage me to keep growing and, getting better as I get older. But, certainly having kids, having a more intense career, having just a lot of other demands with family, extended family, has required me to shift a lot of how I think about sport as I age. And honestly, the physical aspects of it, I get slower. And there are, bladder control issues and all kinds of things that come, with the aging process. And so really, some of it is I am trying to learn and educate. And I know something you all have said in the podcast in the past is, I don't think our healthcare system is great for women, aging women, and particularly aging women in endurance sports. And I'm still struggling to find people who can answer questions and can really take seriously some of the stuff, that I know I'm experiencing, that others are experiencing. So I think we can do better as a healthcare system around that, but I'm trying to make do. I would say the biggest thing for me has been having surgery and figuring out what is related to aging, what is related to recovery, and what is neither. So I think it's an ongoing process, work in progress.
Absolutely. And I think, let's actually jump a little bit ahead on our outline to talk about, you went through a really, really major surgery recently. And it's actually amazing that, we saw you crushing it before that. You've still been in our community this whole time. Here you are back crushing it. But I know it has been an incredibly tough journey to get to this point. So can you just talk about what happened and specifically how it has kind of changed your perspective on sport and how you've gotten through it? Because again, we've had a lot of people in our community, Jim most recently, even having serious injuries and surgery, and always love to get perspectives on how to think about that.
Yeah. And, in some ways there are silver linings around this. I would never wish surgery or, injury on anyone, but I do think it has solidified just kind of what role sport plays in my mental health. And there's some real good things that have actually come out of this. But I think it was 2 years ago, and I started to have very severe sciatica in my left leg, from like my hip down to my toes, like to the point where it was difficult to walk. It was just shooting pain constantly. And I had had it a couple of years before, but was able to kind of work through it with physical therapy. But it came back in a really intense way. So I went to see an orthopedic doctor who, did some x-rays and things and basically told me, you're fine, just do some PT, it'll pass. And I struggled with that because I felt like this is different. It doesn't feel like the same. And I'm really glad I went and got a second opinion. And I would encourage anyone who is having pain, if you don't trust what you're hearing, go ask another doctor, because this doctor did some x-rays and was like, okay, you need to stop some of the activity you're doing immediately because there's a bunch of compression fractures in your vertebrae right around L4, L5, which is basically where you hinge in your back. And I said, well, what would have caused it? Is it caused by cumulative sport? And there's probably some element of that contributed. But he said, No, we tend to see this in really young girls who do a lot of gymnastics or 80-year-old women. And I was like, Doc, I'm not your target market. What is going on here? He said, I don't know. We can't really explain what's going on with you, but PT is not going to fix it because they're actually fractures. So the only thing you can do is get spinal fusion, which is essentially putting in some titanium rods and some vertebrae spacers to get that spine. I had bad scoliosis as a result of these compression fractures, and it was almost fully compressing my nerve, which is why I had this crazy pain. But I have to say, getting that, and I'm so fortunate to live in a city that has such amazing access to hospitals and surgeons. Dr. David Kim at New England Baptist was just such an amazing find. And so he said, let's get you on the schedule. I think what was really hard was the appointments are way backed up. So it was like 3 months before I was going to be able to get in there. I was super relieved to know that there was a fix, if you will. And I had heard some horror stories of folks who said, oh, the surgery was the worst thing I ever did. But I think for me, I was able to, it helped settle my mind a little bit to say, okay, at least we know what's causing it. We know that there is something that you can do that's within your control. We don't know what it's going to be like afterwards. So there was a lot of mental game going into this whole thing because I had to immediately stop doing most exercise that I was doing. And I was left basically with stretching and walking, which made my mom so proud. She's been trying to get me to be a walker forever. So there you go, Mom. But, I had to really then deal with what's going to be my outlet because this has been the thing that has allowed me to maintain my sanity. So I struggled with that. And I struggled with, I don't know what's going to happen after the surgery. Like this could be the end of my endurance career. And I was just getting started. So I really had to just reconcile and come to terms with, I don't know what to expect, but I'm just going to focus on doing the next right thing. And so, the surgery, which is a crazy surgery, medicine and science are just amazing. So we're like 2 surgeons. One had to go in and move around all my organs, the other one in my back and flip me on a table like a rotisserie chicken. Like it's just crazy what they're able to do, right? And so the surgery coming out of it was within a day, they had me up and walking. And within a couple of months, I did a lot of walking, a lot of stretching. But I was so worried that I was going to lose my mind not having exercise. And I think I've said this in the past was it's amazing what you are able to cope with and what you're able to do when you're put in the situation. I think if you had told me we're going to take away the thing that has been your steady outlet for your whole life, I would have said, I don't know if I can do it. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay in the same space that I wanted to be mentally, but you just rise to the occasion. And I think the traits that make us great athletes, like our ability to adapt and be resilient, is the same thing that will help you if you're coming out of an injury. What I found though, is there are a couple of things that were really important as part of that. One, it comes back to the community, right? Finding the people who are just going to support you, like, oh, my training buddies, like they would take walks with me, or they would find stuff that, it's really important to have people around you who are going to do everything to support you. My kids and my husband, they were amazing. They did a lot of walking with me. And the second thing was changing your aspirations, rethinking. And my goal was no longer to be competitive or to do endurance sports. It was, I want to be able to go on vacations with my family and walk without pain. I want to be able to just stay active my whole life and enjoy being outside and doing things. So I just had to reset and come to terms with that. And then the third thing is I had to relearn all of my habits. So the days of like, I can jump out of bed and go for a run and feel great. Yeah, that is no longer the case. I have to allow like an extra 45 minutes every morning because I literally cannot put my socks on until I have stretched and done PT exercises for like 20 minutes. So, I think that the surgery, I'm so grateful I was able to do it. I feel great, knock on wood. My back is holding up. And I have a new appreciation and perspective for just needing to be flexible and be open to things that you never thought you would be able to cope with. So it's been good, actually.
Wow, that's really powerful, Laura. Thank you for sharing. And I think that's something that, we try to break down and talk about in different episodes, but the ability to be flexible with your goals and be flexible with yourself and how you're getting there is so, so important. But to your point, it can feel really, really hard and no one would ever expect that they could do that, but it is possible when you're put in that situation. And I think you just speak to that so, so well. So thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm curious to learn a little bit more specifically when you said, just taking the right next step in this journey and how important that was for you in moving forward. curious on what those next steps in the moment felt like. I understand that it was like a really hard thing and you were able to push through and move forward with it. However, I imagine that at times like it did feel, that you couldn't keep going, and there were some ways that you had to reframe to be able to figure out what that next step was. If you have like an example of what that was, it'd be really useful.
Yeah, I found that I had to push myself to find joy in the different things that I was having to do. And so something like, getting up and knowing I had to do 20 minutes of stretching and exercise, I created a whole routine around that. Like, I am going to have the right lighting, and I'm going to have some music, and I'm going to turn this into a really Zen, almost yoga-like thing. And I found that it was very different from my routine of the past, but it's like, oh, I kind of love starting my day this way, and I kind of miss it when I don't. So I think it is, rather than convincing ourselves that there is a loss, it is, how do I take this new thing that I have to adapt to and build it in a way that actually brings me even more happiness than perhaps what I was doing before. So I think it was resetting my expectations, and it definitely was finding different ways to be active that maybe weren't workouts. I would also say I just went a bit easier on myself in terms of, I'd go to bed super early and I would miss out on things with my family sometimes. So there would be times that I decide I'm just going to stay up a little later. I'm going to have that extra dessert. So some of my next steps were just going with how I felt in the moment. And I also would say, and this kind of ties to mental health stuff too, is I've never been very good about asking for what I need. It's kind of this mentality of, I can do it all, I can make it work, I don't want to have to burden anyone. But I really found, and some of this came through like therapy, is like, you just need to be able to ask for what you need and ask for things from people who were more than happy to do it. They just didn't know you needed it. So I think some of it was just being a bit humble and asking for help. And part of it was just giving myself some grace and trying to find joy in the new habits and routines.
I think that's so valuable. And I think maybe a lot of us probably struggle with the challenge of asking for help when we need it, because especially in endurance sports, sometimes it really is this go-getter attitude of like, you don't need any help. Like, this is a sport, that's one person and you can do it all by yourself. And then maybe that's also how you've approached life. I'm not sure if it's like a chicken or egg scenario, but I think we can all probably learn a lot from that. And knowing that people are really willing to help, that always surprises me, is how much people in your network do want to help you if you ask. So I think that's so valuable to share. And something I've been wondering a little bit about is, you reframed, you were able to tap into these other things. Now you're actually back and you're training and you're signed up for a 70.3, which is so exciting. But I'm wondering, number one, how you're feeling getting ready for that. Number two, what your perspective is. Do you have time goals? Do you want to finish? How do you think about it? And three, are there things that you incorporated kind of into your recovery routine, having that really nice Zen morning, for example, that are still here or that you don't need anymore now that you're back to training, just kind of in the aftermath?
Yeah, I intentionally scheduled a race and no other races for September because honestly, since my surgery was May a year ago, and this is the first time I was going to be able to get back outside and do open water swimming and be on the bike for an extended period of time. And I really didn't know how it was going to go until I started doing it. So I didn't want to do anything early season until I had been able to test out. I could get on the bike for a couple of hours and be like, yeah, no, my back's not having it. So I didn't want to put that pressure on myself. So I really decided I'm going to take the summer and just do fun things and try to build up my fitness base. It's amazing how quickly we can lose our fitness base. So I have some build to do. But it honestly was I'm just going to see how it feels every week and see if I can increase a little bit and not make any decisions. And if I end up getting closer to September and saying, I don't know if I can swing it, I'm going to be comfortable being able to kind of step out. I will say, based on how I feel so far, I'm feeling hopeful. But I would say I am trying to be really disciplined in some ways and really not disciplined in other ways. So I'm super disciplined about kind of the physical therapy and doing, the Calquette stretches and the nerve glides and the clamshells and all the things that are now part of my daily existence. Doing that is always going to stay. I think that's going to need to be a lifelong thing for me. And I'd encourage anyone who's like, oh, stretching, I know I should do it, but I never make time for it. Oh my gosh, it's so worth it. Do it. So I need to keep that up. The other thing I'm really having fun with is like a number of folks in my community, I'm got a training buddy who's doing Sea to Summit like you, Katie, and someone who just did the Western Mass Half. And so I kind of was able to work my workouts around whatever they were doing. I was just along for the ride, and it was fun because it was low pressure. I was just there to be their community. And I know they'll be able to do the same for me closer to September because I put in the time supporting them. So I don't know. I think it's just that idea of, the structure, the rigor, but also finding fun stuff to do. And I think you all, the Endurance Drive community, has inspired me so much in terms of just go out there and have some adventures, like doing a little bit of trail running and thinking about more hiking. And so some of the goals I have for next year when I turn 50, like I want to do some national parks and do the Grand Canyon, things like that. So I think it really is give yourself the space to really recover in a slow, methodical way, do the things that feel good, and then have fun, be with your people, and just, enjoy being out there. And I don't have to put the pressure on myself about the racing. So I have no time goals. It's really feel good and, be ready to do it and feel like the fitness level is there. So I guess that's what I'm focusing on for the next couple months.
Yeah, we love the fun adventure balance with the training. That's definitely something that we promote and are big advocates of. So yeah, I think I would love to go a little bit deeper on something that you actually brought up to us in a form of this debate that you've had a bit here and there on, you have such good discipline. I'm honestly in awe of your discipline and need to get my morning routine to your level. But having this discipline to go out and push yourself, but also knowing when to give yourself the grace and when to balance, especially as you're pursuing these different goals. It sounds like you've kind of figured that out a little bit more from what you were just describing, but I guess maybe curious to bounce that question back to you and say, where do you think you struggle with that? And maybe we can bounce around some ideas of how we've also thought about that.
Yeah, I am hoping you can help with this one. So it's something, and I think going back a couple episodes where you really talked about being durable and being resilient and wanting to really build this strength to get through hard things, but then also this idea of, but we have to give ourselves recovery time. We have to know when our body's telling us to take a break. And I would say I haven't totally figured this out. And it could be even, a couple days ago, I was taking a run and, was doing some pickups, and I think I was supposed to do 6 or 7, and I hit mile 4 and I was like, oh, this feels awful. And I know, I can hear Jim's voice in my head saying, listen, 1/3 of all your workouts are going to suck. 1/3 are going to feel okay. 1/3 will be good. And I'm like, this is definitely in the bottom 1/3. But I struggle with this, should I be making the call to, I'm going to cut this short because it feels really bad. I powered through and ended up being okay afterwards. And so maybe it was that time of, hey, you know what, you made it. And that actually proves that you can do this thing. But I'm curious if there are things, even like physical things that you notice, mental things that when you're like in it and you're like, this could go 2 ways, I could really kind of destroy myself if I keep going. Or it could be, I just need to get over this mental hurdle and push through. I don't have the answer. I'm hoping you guys do.
I will share a framework that I have that I think is helpful. I think there's a micro level and a macro level. And what I mean by that is on the micro level, it's in the workouts themselves, how you're feeling. Basically, my rule is that if you go 3 days where your runs feel horrible, like something's very wrong, I'm taking a mandatory rest day because something is not right. And then also within the workouts, if anything that's I'm feeling is getting actively worse as I continue, then I also stop, like from an injury or a pain perspective. It's like, that's not worth it to me. I'm not going to try to make anything worse. If I just don't feel good during a run, like I'm doing the workout and it's just not feeling good, I might adapt the paces and be like, all right, I don't have it today, but I'm going to try to get through that workout just so I can tell myself that I can. And try to stick with that schedule because it's a good exercise and trying to push yourself a little bit. And you might surprise yourself by the end that the first 2 felt horrible. I've had this happen so many times where the first 2 feel absolutely horrible. I normally would give up on the workout, and then somehow it comes out the next 6 feel great or something. So that's on the micro level. I do think it's really important though to think on the macro level about what your goals are and where your energy is being spent, because pushing yourself requires mental energy, and if you only have so much mental energy to give, then it might not be best spent pushing yourself to go do something when you have other things going on in your life that would require more of that. So in a recent phase where I've just been traveling a lot, very tired, not really feeling like I have a super A goal race that I need to be focused on, and struggling a bit with just the things I'm balancing and just staying up to date with life in general, I was like, you know what? I'm going to run however I feel like it. And if I don't have it today, then I'm walking and then I'm coming home. And that was because my mental energy was best spent for my own mental health in other places rather than pushing myself. So and I will say this is never, it's still not very helpful in the sense that there's not clear metrics for you to measure when you should do one or the other. But I have found that I either go through phases where I'm focused on training and I'm just trying to figure out my approach to the workouts versus phases where I'm struggling with a lot of other stuff and the workouts are going to be my lower priority, and we'll see how it fits in.
Yeah, I think that 3-day rule is actually really, really fantastic. Of course, if you're on a single run and you are having extreme pain in your leg or something, that doesn't mean like run on it 3 more times and then see how you're doing. But in general, the idea of, just sort of a nebulous, like, this isn't really feeling right. Sometimes that is just a one-off, and sometimes that just falls into that rule of thirds. Again, a third of your workouts might not feel so great. I think I do also try and draw on some objective indicators, for example. So there's good data and there's bad data out there, but I do pay attention to like, how is my sleep been? Where is my resting heart rate? Where is my HRV? Have I been crushing it with fueling? Have I been not so good with that? Where is my life stress? And I think all of that can just give a little bit more of an explanation maybe to why you might not be feeling so good, and can create space to give yourself some grace. It's like, okay, well, I feel really bad and I've averaged 6 hours of sleep for the last 4 nights and been on 5 flights and all these different crazy things that happen. Like, it checks out then. And I think it's not always all or nothing. There's often like, hey, maybe you don't do pickups, but you stick out and you finish the 5-mile run or whatever it is. So there's sort of a roll down of things where you can still build like a resilience data point and say like, I did get it done, but I didn't do the exact workout as prescribed. So if we think of like a hard interval run at the top, and then maybe underneath that's more of your zone 2 run, and then below that it's like a hike, and then below that it's just a walk, and sometimes just pivoting down like 1 or 2 or 3 steps where it's not like you're just going to go home and do nothing. Again, there are times when that's what you need to do as well. But again, don't feel bad about yourself for just not hitting the pickups. It's okay to make those modifications. And I think you still can tell yourself, hey, I did something hard because the way that I was feeling going into it was worse.
I love that. And I have been much more conscious about taking recovery days, way more than I ever did before. So I appreciate that you all still have that mantra very much. The other thing I am doing is and this is part of that aging conversation, is I find that I do need to fuel differently. Like, I used to be able to go out on an empty stomach, and now I just have to be much more conscious of, hey, I need to eat something in the morning before I go. So there is all these data points, all this learning that comes from the really crappy workouts that, if you listen to your body, you can change some of your habits. So I thank you for all of that.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think that's awesome that you are able to pick up some of the changes and actually implement those, because that can also be a slow learning process for some. And Katie, I do love your approach to the roll down. I think that's something that I didn't even think to articulate, but it's the natural thought process of, okay, it's not going to be the hard workout, it's going to be the easy one. It's not going to be the easy run, it's going to be a walk. And sometimes just the metric that I care about is more, did I try to get out the door and do something, which we talked about before. So super helpful.
Definitely. So Laura, I have one more question for you. I'm not sure if Elena has any, but this is a topic that we've asked a lot of people about on the podcast, and we've alluded to it a couple times in this episode. But can you talk to us about how you think about balance? I think everyone is always trying to figure out balance, and you are someone who juggles so many different things and wears so many hats. Is balance a myth? Is it something you can achieve? Do you feel balanced? Maybe let's just riff on that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the day, the hour, the minute, if I feel balanced or not. And I think something you just said is something that I'm constantly thinking about, is that we do not have an infinite pool of emotion and energy that we can use. So I think the wisdom I have gotten as I have gone through this aging process is that I need to think about where I invest my energy and my time, and that it has to be in trying to hit that balance has to be part of the consideration. And so I won't say that I have nailed this, but I think I'm much more aware that there are things I'm just going to have to get comfortable saying, I can't do that. I'm going to let go of that. And, I never inherited the cleaning gene. Like, I hate to clean my house. It is not where I would spend my time. And I have just gotten to the point where I'm going to make some decisions. Like, yes, I'm going to hire a cleaning lady because that is not where I want to spend my emotional time and energy. So I'm going to focus that energy on something else. So I think it's looking at the trade-offs, making some decisions, and figuring out, what you can let go of so that you're not trying to do it all. I do think there's this interesting element of, there's this natural inclination, I think, for women in particular to nurture, right? And so I feel obligated. It's not even because there is someone holding an expectation out there for me. I'm holding the expectation myself of, I want to, support my kids, and I want to be there for this, and I'm going to make dinner, and I'm going to, walk the dog, and I'm going to do all these things. And I think that is because I'm hardwired, like a lot of women, to just feel like I'm playing my nurturing role. So I think some of it's self-inflicted, and I need to get better about drawing boundaries for myself. But I do think there's a difference in roles and, things I have to put rules in place for myself. Like I can't go and do a workout all day on a Saturday where there's, other folks that maybe I've kind of trained with in the past and like they can disappear for 8 hours at a time. I'm like, I just can't do that. So the balance for me is knowing where I can draw some boundaries, where I can let go of things, and also know that I'm not going to do anything that feels like I'm sacrificing something I don't want to. So, I might have a shorter workout because I want to go spend time with my kids. So I think it's just getting comfortable with, what can you live with? And, when you feel like you are losing the balance, making sure you have the things in place that are going to help you redirect, or before you become like a puddle and you just can't handle it anymore. So for me, that is being really super aware of, do I need to get sleep? Do I need some downtime? Do I need some alone time, like just away from people, and making sure I build that in? And then it goes back to what I said earlier, like I have just got to get better about asking for help. Like I need you to make dinner tonight. I need you to take the dog for a walk. I need to go be by myself for a couple minutes. So I think balance is more achievable when we get really humble about what we're able to do. And we just are able to kind of ask for what we need.
That's very, very well said. And I guess a quick follow on to that is, what is your sign that you are maybe out of balance, or your sign that you're too full at the moment and you need to reevaluate where your energy is being spent?
Yeah, I think very low energy. I'll find that I'm tired, even though I've maybe gotten a decent amount of sleep. I just feel a little bit lethargic. If I'm a little bit snippy with my family, they will say things like, hey, maybe you should go for a run. Very subtle little encouragement. And some of it is if I feel myself, because I'm generally a pretty positive, optimistic person, if I find kind of thoughts entering my head where I'm just feeling a little bit down or I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, those are the signals. I'm an emotional person too. So if there are ever tears that start to creep in over something like, can you unload the dishwasher? I know I've probably hit my max that night. There's something else going on. So I just really started, and this is one of the benefits of getting older, is you do start to get to know yourself really well, and you can kind of flag those things earlier on. So I'm getting better at it, but yeah, I think it's my mood, my emotions, my actions, and what the people around me are telling me about how I'm doing. Those are the things that I notice.
Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say that you're one of the experts at making balance work for you. So appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you. I don't know that that's true fully, but I'm learning.
Well, we're learning a ton from you, and this is always so valuable for us. And I'm sure it's going to be super valuable for our listeners too. So thank you, Laura, so much for joining us. We do have one more question for you to close us out. We always do our gear pick of the week. So we will each share a gear pick of the week, and then we're asking you to share your gear pick of the week that we can add to our big long list of gear. So I'm going to take this one first. I swim sometimes, as people know. I don't really love to swim a ton, but I will do it a couple times a week because I am a triathlete, and I really don't like when my skin and hair smell like chlorine. So I am going to recommend the Try Hard shampoo, conditioner, and body wash trio. They have a bunch of other products too, like things that are supposed to get rid of goggle lines so you don't look like a raccoon anymore. But I find that their stuff is really, really good for post-pool as well as salt water. So yeah, highly recommend. We're here for the beauty tips always at the Nerd Tribe.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to stay on the hydration train for mine and go with the Nathan's ExoShot hand flask. I was never a hand flask person while running, but the trails in Salt Lake, I just find myself wanting to go a little bit further, and it's really, really hot. And so I've been running more with a hand flask just to have some water with me, even if it's like a shorter run. Like even if I'm going for just 30 minutes, I want to have some electrolytes with me when it's this hot. So this hand flask is small, but feels very comfortable and pretty natural, and made me adjust to liking hand flasks so quickly. And then I went back to another one because I couldn't find it one day, and I was like, oh, this is way less nice, and I wouldn't have ever enjoyed this. So yeah, just love the ExoShot hand flask.
Awesome. And we will link both of these in the extended show notes if you check out our website. Laura, your gear pick of the week.
Yeah, so I am one of those runners that needs music or some kind of distraction during my runs. And a couple of years ago, I guess I got the Shocks Bone Conduction headphones. So for those of you who don't know, they kind of sit on the outside and you can kind of hear through, bone conduction versus having, the pods directly in your ears. And I find I like it for a couple of reasons. One, I'm convincing myself that I'm not going to go deaf later in life because I've been listening to loud music. But it also allows you to really hear what's going on in addition to hearing the music. And I find if I have AirPods or something in, I close out a little bit to things I should be paying attention to, whether it's traffic or other people or, so I really like these headphones because you kind of listen to music, do your thing, but you also have full ability to hear around your surroundings. So I can't recommend them enough.
That's a great gear pick of the week. And Laura, what kind of music do you listen to? This is also an interesting question for the podcast.
Everything, like literally everything, from country to indie to, rock to, there is nothing that I don't like. Music has been such a huge thing for me my whole life. And that's probably the number one thing when you talked about how do you help your mood? How do you find a song and let it pick you up? And that's a go-to.
Now I want to see your top 50 Spotify playlist.
I'll share my playlist. You'd be like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. We will definitely have to have you on again because you have a lot of pearls of wisdom and I feel like we only scratched the surface. But if we don't talk to you before then, good luck at your race. I'm sure a whole community will be tracking and supporting and we know you're going to crush it. So thanks again.
Thanks, Leigh.